There are moments in life when a mere 10 minutes is all it takes to turn a person's fate from black to white. On that particular morning, in the grand lobby of a corporation with hundreds of employees, I was slapped so hard I stumbled and fell onto the cold marble floor. Before the stunned eyes of everyone present, the person who struck me was no stranger. It was my sister-in-law, a powerful COO, a woman to whom everyone bowed their heads in fear and respect. She looked down at me with an expression of pure contempt, a smirk playing on her lips as she uttered a sentence that silenced the entire lobby. "Someone like you is lucky I even let you in this company. It's the charity case of a lifetime." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't try to explain. I simply stood up, brushed the dust from my dress, pulled out my phone, and made a single call. When I spoke into the receiver, my voice was steady. "Fire the COO for me." She burst out laughing, a mocking sound that echoed across the vast space. "And who do you think you are? I am the law here." But she didn't know that it was the last time in her life she would have the power to laugh like that. Because just 10 minutes later, her world began to crumble. I still remember that morning with perfect clarity. The sun hadn't yet reached its peak, and the lobby still carried the clean, sharp scent of freshly polished granite. The receptionists in their crisp, navy blue blazers were adjusting their name tags. The rhythmic click of high heels on the floor created a symphony of ambition and cold professionalism. People bustled in and out, everyone in a hurry, everyone busy, everyone wearing the tense expression so characteristic of the corporate world in downtown Chicago. I stood before the revolving glass doors, my hand clutching the strap of my purse, and took a deep breath. This wasn't my first time entering this building, but it was my first time doing so as a member of the family. I had been married for just over 3 months. My husband, Mark, was a gentle, quiet man, an engineer working in his own family's company. He wasn't a man of power, nor was he the favored child. He was the type of person who fit in anywhere, which is to say, he kept his head down. I, on the other hand, was different. I had never believed in just keeping your head down. From the day I married into the Harrison family, I understood one thing very clearly. This family didn't need me. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, a woman accustomed to a life of luxury and old money, had looked me up and down during our first meeting and said only one thing. "This family has no shortage of wealth, Sarah. We only fear a shortage of discretion." The words were light, but they felt like ice. And my sister-in-law, Victoria, the woman who would later slap me in the lobby, made almost no effort to hide her disdain. She wore an impeccably tailored black power suit, her hair in a severe bun, her lips painted a defiant red. Her eyes were always sizing me up, as if I were a discount item on a clearance rack. She'd looked at me, a corner of her mouth lifting into a sneer. "So, you're the one who married my brother? You're adequate." I just smiled and nodded, not because I was weak, but because I knew that, in that moment, smiling was safer than speaking. After the wedding, Mark suggested I apply for a job at the company. "You could work in the same building as me," he'd said softly. "It would be nice for the commute." I agreed, but I knew the real reason. I wasn't being hired for my skills. The day I received the acceptance email, the message was brutally concise. Position: administrative assistant. Contract: probationary. Approving manager: Victoria Harrison, COO. Her name sat at the bottom like a final judgment. That first morning, I wore a modest beige dress and low heels, trying to look as ordinary, as invisible as possible. I didn't want to attract attention. I didn't want to become office gossip. But it seemed my very existence was a thorn in someone's side. The moment I walked through the door, several pairs of eyes shot toward me. I overheard whispers. "Is that the engineer's wife? The new daughter-in-law? I hear the COO can't stand her." I pretended not to hear. HR led me up to the 25th floor. The hallway was long, illuminated by stark fluorescent lights, and the air conditioning was so cold it gave me goosebumps. With every step, I felt like I was entering a place where I didn't belong. I had barely settled into my cubicle when my desk phone rang. My office. Now, the female voice was cold and clipped. I knew who it was. The CEO's office was on the top floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows. 2 perfectly manicured, soulless plants flanked the heavy oak door. I knocked and entered. Victoria was sitting behind a massive desk, her back straight, a pen in her hand. She didn't look up. A thick stack of files was pushed toward me. "Get this done. You have 3 days." I was taken aback. "Of course. Which department is this for?" She finally looked up, her expression one you'd give a fool. "It's for you." Then, a faint, humorless smile. "Don't think marrying into the family gets you any special treatment. There are no exceptions here." I silently took the files. Just before I turned to leave, she added one more thing. Her voice a low murmur, but sharp enough to cut. "If you can't handle it, have the decency to quit. Don't make things awkward for everyone." I walked out of her office, my arms laden with the heavy stack of paper. The hallway was still long, the lights still bright, but inside me, something had quietly started to crack. No one in that company knew that I wasn't there to cling to anyone's coattails, nor was I there to prove how brilliant I was. I was there because I needed to see, with my own eyes, the true faces of the people in power. And I never expected that from that day forward. Step by step, I was walking toward the moment I would be slapped to the ground in the lobby, the moment everything would be turned upside down. After that first day, I officially became part of the company, but not in the way people normally go to work. I was more like a shadow, a ghost pushed into a forgotten corner, existing quietly, ignored by all but scrutinized by many. My desk was at the very end of the administrative department, right by a window. The morning sun was blinding, and the afternoon sun cast a pale, sickly yellow light on the stacks of paper that towered over my head. The printer whirred incessantly, and the smell of ink and fresh paper often made me feel nauseous. The workload was abnormally large. Tasks that should have been divided among 3 or 4 people were all piled onto my desk, from data entry and report consolidation to running documents between departments. No one said it outright, but everyone understood. This was an order from the top. I arrived early every morning and left late every night. At first, my colleagues would make a few polite inquiries, but soon they began to avoid me. They were afraid of being associated with me, of being labeled as on the daughter-in-law's side. In this company, picking the wrong side was career suicide. Once, I was carrying a tall stack of documents, carefully checking each page for errors as I walked. A coworker brushed past me, bumping my arm. The files scattered across the floor, papers flying everywhere. I bent down to pick them up. She paused for a second, looked at me, and then walked away. No apology, no offer to help. It was as if I didn't exist. I usually ate lunch alone. The company cafeteria was always crowded and vibrant with laughter and chatter, but the tables around me were always empty. A few people would glance over, some with curiosity, some with pity, but no one dared to come close. I got used to it. What exhausted me most wasn't the work, but the looks. The look in Victoria's eyes whenever she swept through the administrative department, a cold, dismissive gaze, as if my very presence was an offense. One day, she stopped directly in front of my desk. "Where's yesterday's report?" I shot up from my chair, handing her the folder with both hands. "Here it is." She flipped through a few pages, then tossed the entire folder back onto my desk. The sound made me flinch. "The numbers are wrong." "Do it again." I was stunned. "But these numbers came directly from the accounting department." She looked up, her eyes sharp as daggers. "Are you questioning me?" I immediately lowered my head. "No, of course not." She turned to leave, firing a final, chilling remark over her shoulder. "Remember, in this company, what I say is the truth." In moments like those, I would clench my fist under the desk, my nails digging into my palms. It wasn't out of anger, but to remind myself, not yet. In the evenings, I told my husband nothing. Mark would come home from work exhausted, eat dinner, and then sit silently, scrolling through his phone. He didn't know, and perhaps didn't want to know, what was happening inside his own family's company. My mother-in-law was no different. She would ask me the same single question at dinner. "Is work going well?" I would give a short reply. "Yes, it's fine." She would nod, and that was the end of it. To her, whether it was fine or not didn't matter, as long as I wasn't causing any trouble. Only I knew that with each passing day, I was being pushed further and further, not away from the company, but away from the normal limits of human endurance. And then, one afternoon, as I was compiling data, an internal email popped up. The subject line was brief. "My office." No reason, no explanation. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 6 p.m. The department was already emptying out. The hallways were deserted, and the lights cast long shadows on the polished floor. The sound of my own footsteps echoed loudly, as if keeping time with my pounding heart. Standing before the COO's office, I took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in." Victoria's voice was cold and short. I didn't know then that this meeting was just the prelude. And from the moment I opened that door, everything began to spiral downward, faster than I could have ever imagined. The office door clicked shut behind me with a dry, final sound. The room was spacious, with high ceilings and white lights that reflected off the gleaming surface of the desk. It was always cold in here, a chill that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from the person sitting behind that desk. Victoria didn't look up. She was focused on her computer screen, her fingers typing at a steady, rhythmic pace, as if I were just an invisible object that had drifted into the room. I stood there. I wasn't told to sit, wasn't invited to speak. Nearly a minute passed in heavy silence before she finally spoke. "Do you know why I called you up here?" "No, I don't." She let out a soft laugh, devoid of any humor. "You don't, or you're pretending not to." She turned her laptop screen toward me. On it was a spreadsheet, with rows of numbers circled in red, accompanied by a barrage of critical notes. "Look." I stepped closer, my heart beating faster. "Do you see it? Wrong. It's all wrong." I swallowed hard. I compiled this table using the data sent from the accounting department. If there's a mistake. Before I could finish, she slammed her hand on the desk. "Don't blame others." The sound echoed in the quiet room, startling me. She stood up and walked slowly toward me, the heels of her shoes clicking ominously on the floor. "Do you have any idea how much money this company loses every day? A single incorrect number can disrupt the entire chain of operations." I bowed my head. "I accept responsibility. I'll redo it immediately." She stopped right in front of me, staring directly into my eyes. Her voice dropped, but it was sharper than ever. "You think an apology fixes this?" She tilted her head, a half smile playing on her lips. "Or do you think, because you're family, you get a free pass?" That question made my stomach drop. I understood perfectly. She didn't care about the work. She just wanted to see me bow. "I don't think that. I just want to do my job well." She stared at me for a few more seconds, then turned back to her desk. "Tomorrow, we're having a meeting with the entire administrative division. You will present this report again to everyone." I froze. "Victoria." She sat down, her voice cold. "I'm giving you a chance to redeem yourself. Or are you too scared?" I clenched my fists. "I can do it." A smirk touched her lips. "I certainly hope so." The next morning, the conference room was packed. Department heads, managers, and staff from every section were present. The atmosphere was so tense that people only spoke in whispers. I stood in front of the projection screen, the remote in my hand, my palms slick with sweat. At the head of the table, Victoria sat with her back straight, her arms crossed, her eyes like ice. "Begin," she said. I took a deep breath and started my presentation. The first few slides went smoothly. I tried to keep my voice steady, having double-checked every number, every chart, until I knew them by heart. But when I got to the fifth slide, she raised her hand, and the room fell silent. She pointed to the screen. "Where did you get this data?" "From the accounting department." "Do you have the email confirmation?" "Yes, though." "Then why is it still wrong?" I hesitated. "If you'll allow me, I can double-check." She laughed, a sharp, clear sound that filled the room. "And have everyone in this room wait while you double-check?" A few people looked down. Others glanced at me with pity. She continued, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or is it that you're just not competent enough? Or perhaps you were only hired because you're my brother's wife?" A low murmur went through the room. My face burned with humiliation. I was hired through the same application and process as everyone else. "Enough," she snapped, standing up. "Don't give me that nonsense. In this company, if you can't do the job, you leave." She stared directly at me, enunciating every word. "And let me be blunt. I do not tolerate incompetence in my division." The air in the room turned to stone. I stood there, before dozens of pairs of eyes, feeling as if my dignity was being stripped away, layer by layer. But I didn't cry. I didn't run. I bowed my head and said, in a very small voice, "I understand." The meeting ended in a heavy, oppressive silence. As people filed out, I remained standing in front of the blank screen. In my head, her words echoed. This wasn't about work anymore. This was a public execution, and I knew, from that moment on, she wouldn't stop. Because to her, I wasn't just an employee to be fired. I was a thorn to be completely broken. After the meeting, I returned to my desk feeling like I'd been flayed alive in public. No one said anything. No one asked if I was okay. The administrative office was filled with the usual noise of printers and keyboards. But around me, There was a vacuum of silence. I bowed my head and continued to work as if nothing had happened. Only I knew that something inside my chest was being squeezed tighter and tighter. That afternoon, I got a text from my husband. "Mom wants us to come home for dinner tonight." I stared at the screen for a long time. My gut told me this dinner would not be a simple one. It was a meal without laughter. The house was spacious and cool, the dining table laden with food, but the atmosphere was so heavy you could hear every breath. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, sat at the head of the table. Victoria sat to her right. My husband, Mark, sat across from me, his eyes avoiding mine. The meal began in silence. I was only halfway through my plate when Eleanor put down her fork. "How are things at the company, Sarah?" I looked up. "I'm still trying my best." Victoria let out a soft, derisive laugh. "Anyone can try. But if you can't deliver, you shouldn't bother." I gripped my fork tighter. Eleanor glanced at Victoria, then back at me. "This family doesn't need to support another person, but we also don't need someone who negatively impacts the business." I understood. They didn't care about right or wrong. They only cared about protecting their power and peace. Mark finally spoke up, his voice soft. "Victoria, I think—" "Stay out of this, Mark," Victoria cut him off. "Company business is not your concern." My husband lowered his head. Seeing that, a chill went through me. The man I had married was powerless in front of his own family. Eleanor ended the dinner with a single, concise statement. "If you feel you can't handle the pressure, you can quit. No one is forcing you." Her words were gentle, but to me, they sounded like a polite dismissal. Later that week, I had to return to the office late in the afternoon to drop off a file at Victoria's office. The lobby was busier than usual. Employees were leaving for the day. Visitors were coming and going, and security guards stood by the doors. I walked quickly, just wanting to get it over with. But as I approached the reception desk, a voice rang out, clear and loud. "Can't you even walk properly?" I stopped. Victoria was standing there, flanked by a few department heads. She looked me up and down, her eyes like ice. "You dropped something." I bent down to pick up a few papers that had slipped from my folder. She crossed her arms, her voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. "Sloppy with your work, and you can't even walk straight." I stood up and said quietly, "I'm sorry." She laughed. "Sorry? You say that so often, it must be second nature by now." Some people nearby pretended to be busy, but I knew they were listening to every word. She took a step closer to me, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "Remember your place. Don't think marrying my brother gives you any power here." I could feel the blood rush to my face, but I kept my head down. Not because I was a coward, but because I wasn't ready to show my hand. She turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the middle of the lobby, clutching the file, feeling the pitying eyes of the entire world on me. That night, I came home very late. Mark asked, "What's wrong? You seem off today." I looked at him for a long time, then said only one thing. "It's nothing." But in my heart, I knew. This family would not protect me. This company was pushing me to the brink. And from that moment, I began to prepare for something no one saw coming. Because if they were determined to back me into a corner, I would find my own way out. After that evening, I felt a distinct shift in the way people at the office looked at me. It was no longer curiosity or pity, but pure avoidance. Conversations would halt when I walked by. Emails that used to have my name in the CC field suddenly stopped coming. Documents that required my sign-off were no longer sent to my desk. I was like a piece on a chessboard, being silently removed from the game. The next morning, as I sat down, a folder was dropped unceremoniously in front of me. It was the head of the administrative department. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "The COO needs you to process this urgently." I opened the folder. Inside was a set of contracts with an old partner, along with a final expense report. I frowned slightly, but I think this was already approved and closed last month. She shrugged. "I don't know the details. The COO said you're to handle it, so just do it." Her words were casual, but they sounded like a warning bell in my mind. I took the file back to my desk and read through it carefully. The more I read, the more I felt that something was wrong. Some numbers had been altered with a red pen. Several signatures were clearly photocopied, not original. And one expense item had been inflated to double the amount stated in the original contract. My heart began to pound. If this file was resubmitted with my approval, I would be the one held responsible. I stood up and took the file to the accounting department. "Excuse me?" Can you tell me if this account has been settled? The accountant glanced at the folder and frowned. This was closed out a long time ago. Why is it being brought up again? I lowered my voice. Some of the figures in here don't match up. The accountant looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, "You'd be wise to stay away from that. This is complicated." Her words sent a chill down my spine. That night, just as I was getting into bed, my phone rang. It was an internal company number. The time was 10:47 p.m. I hesitated for a second, then answered. "Be in my office early tomorrow." Victoria's voice was devoid of emotion. "There's something we need to resolve." "What is it about?" "You'll find out tomorrow." Click. The call ended abruptly. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the pieces clicking into place in my mind. The public shaming at the meeting, the cold family dinner, the humiliation in the lobby, and now, a file that was clearly a trap. They didn't just want me to quit. They wanted me to leave in disgrace, branded as a criminal. The next morning, I went to the COO's office earlier than usual. 3 people were already there. Victoria, the head of administration, and the chief financial officer. The door closed, and the air grew thick and heavy, so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Victoria pushed the file toward me. "Explain this." I looked her straight in the eye. "There are problems with this file. I can't sign it." The room was silent for a beat. Then she laughed. "You can't sign it? Are you trying to obstruct company business?" "I'm just doing my job responsibly." She leaned forward, her eyes like ice. "Responsibility? Who are you to talk about responsibility here?" The CFO spoke up, his voice flat. "If you don't sign, you'll be the one held responsible for the delay and the discrepancies." His words hit me. "Why me?" Victoria stood up and walked toward me. "Because you're the one holding the file. Because you were assigned to process it. And because," she paused, "you're the easiest one to blame." I understood. They had orchestrated everything. They needed a scapegoat. I clenched my fists and looked directly at her. "If I sign this, all the consequences will fall on me." She smiled, a confident, predatory smile. "If you cooperate, I'll let you resign quietly." I lifted my head. For the first time, I looked at her without fear. Because in that moment, I suddenly remembered another phone call and another person, someone she had no idea I knew. And I knew that if they were determined to push me off a cliff, I would be taking them all down with me. After that meeting, I walked out of the COO's office with a strange sense of calm. There was no panic, no trembling, just a cold, clear resolve. I now understood their game. And once you understand the rules, you know you can't play by them anymore. I returned to my desk, placed the file in a drawer, and locked it. Outwardly, everything was normal. The printer whirred, phones rang, colleagues laughed and chatted. No one knew that in my desk drawer sat a ticking time bomb. I opened my laptop and worked as if nothing had happened, but in my mind, a plan was taking shape. At lunchtime, I didn't go to the cafeteria. I stayed in the office, waiting until most people had left, then took out the file. I photographed every page, making sure to get clear shots of the altered numbers, the photocopied signatures, the red ink layered over the original print. I sent all the images to a personal email address and saved a copy onto a small USB drive, which I hid in my purse. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the knowledge that I had just crossed a line. If I were caught, I would lose more than just my job. But if I did nothing, I would lose my integrity. That afternoon, an internal message from Victoria popped up on my screen. "Is the file done yet?" I replied concisely, "I'm doing a final review." A few minutes later, another message came. "Hurry up." Just 2 words, but I could feel the impatience seething behind them. Near the end of the day, as I was packing up, the CFO walked past my desk. He paused, glanced around, and then lowered his voice. "Be careful." I looked up. "I'm sorry?" He looked at me for a few seconds, then said quietly, "This involves people higher up than just the COO." My hand tightened around my pen. "What do you mean?" He didn't elaborate, but he left me with a statement that made my blood run cold. "Do you know who signs off on the final approval for contracts like that?" I shook my head. He looked at me and said slowly, "The chairman of the board." My heart hammered against my ribs. The chairman. In this company. That name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones. He walked away, leaving me frozen at my desk. If the documents in my possession were linked to the chairman himself, then this was no longer a simple case of a daughter-in-law being bullied. This was a high-stakes game. That evening, I went home earlier than usual. Mark looked at me, a little surprised. No overtime tonight? I shook my head. I'm tired. He nodded, asking no more questions. But when I went into our home office, I noticed that the drawer of my desk had been slightly disturbed. The USB drive was still there, but a wave of unease washed over me. They were watching me. I lay in bed that night with the lights off, staring into the darkness. For the first time, I wondered if I was going too far. But then I remembered the look in Victoria's eyes when she said, "You're the easiest one to blame. No. If I back down now, I would forever be the one who took the fall." I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. A name appeared on the screen. I hadn't called it yet, but my thumb hovered over the button, because I knew that once that call was made, there would be no turning back. The next morning, the moment I stepped into the lobby, I could feel it. The atmosphere was different, not louder, but heavier. The security guards watched me for a moment too long. The receptionist gave me a curt nod instead of her usual greeting. A few employees turned away quickly when they saw me coming. I knew things were escalating. I hadn't even reached my desk when my phone rang. My office. Now. No polite please. No Victoria. I stood up, grabbing my purse. Inside, the small USB drive felt like a secret waiting to be told. The lights were on in the COO's office. Victoria was standing with her back to the door, looking out the window, her arms crossed. On her desk lay the familiar file, placed neatly next to a pen. "Sit down." I sat. "I'm giving you one last chance. Either you sign, or you're fired." I looked her straight in the eye. "If I sign, I assume all legal responsibility." She nodded sharply. "Correct. And you?" She laughed, a sound laced with contempt. "I'm just management. The person who makes the mistake is the one who pays the price." I nodded slowly. "And if I don't sign?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low threat. "Then I'll have our legal department handle it." And who do you think they're going to believe? I understood. They had already written the script for my downfall. I stood up and picked up the pen. A look of triumph flashed in her eyes. But just as the tip of the pen touched the paper, I paused. "Before I sign, may I ask one question?" She frowned. "What is it? Who originally proposed these contracts?" The atmosphere in the room froze for a split second. "That's not relevant," she said quickly. I stared directly into her eyes. "It is. Because the final signature on them isn't yours." She flinched. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. And in that moment, a memory surfaced. That afternoon, I had left the office early, claiming I felt unwell. I didn't go home. I went to a quiet little cafe, tucked away in an old brick alley, and opened my phone. I scrolled back through my emails. Nearly 4 years back. Back then, I wasn't a Harrison, wasn't an employee of this company, but I had worked with them indirectly. An email appeared on the screen. The sender was a name I had tried to forget for years. Mr. Harrison, chairman of the board. I had been part of an independent project as a data consultant. That project had been abruptly canceled for no stated reason, and all related files were recalled. I remembered it vividly because, during my analysis, I had discovered a massive financial discrepancy. When I reported it, the project was immediately shut down, and the person who personally told me not to dig any deeper was him. I put down my phone, my heart racing. If the current contracts were structured in the same way as that project from 4 years ago, then none of this was a coincidence. Late that afternoon, I returned to the office to sign the papers. Victoria was waiting. "Have you made your decision?" I looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. "Yes, I have." She pushed the file toward me. I picked up the pen, but this time, I didn't even pretend to sign. I placed it back on the desk and said slowly, "I need to make a phone call first." She laughed. "Who are you going to call? Your husband?" I looked up, meeting her gaze. "No, I'm calling the person who gives the final signature." The smile froze on her face. The COO's office was suddenly so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Victoria stared at me, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What did you just say?" I didn't answer immediately. I just calmly took my phone out of my purse. She let out a dry, forced laugh. "Don't tell me you're trying to intimidate me. This isn't a playground for your childish games." I looked at her, my composure unshakable. "I'm not trying to intimidate anyone. I'm just calling the right person." I dialed the number. As the phone rang, once, twice, I saw the expression on her face shift from irritation to alarm. Then, a voice on the other end answered, a deep, concise male voice, devoid of emotion. I took a steadying breath. "Hello, Mr. Harrison." This is Sarah. I was the data consultant on Project X 4 years ago. The line went silent. It wasn't the silence of a bad connection, but the silence of someone thinking very, very quickly. I continued, my voice even. I'm currently holding a set of contracts with a cost structure identical to that project. Victoria shot up from her chair. What the hell do you think you're doing? I held up a hand to silence her. On the other end of the line, the man's voice became deeper. Where are you? In the COO's office. With the person who is demanding I sign for these expenses. The tension in the room was palpable. I could hear Victoria swallow hard. Put her on the phone. The words were spoken softly, but they carried the weight of a command. I turned to my sister-in-law and held out the phone. She looked from me to the phone, her eyes wide with disbelief. Take it, I said. She took the phone, her voice trying to sound composed. Yes? Hello? A few seconds later, the color drained from her face. Yes, sir. I understand. Yes, I'll take care of it immediately. The call ended. She stood frozen, the phone still in her hand, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. The arrogant smirk was gone. The entire room was deathly still. Victoria turned back to me, her voice completely different. Go back to your desk. I raised an eyebrow. In the file? She glanced at the stack of papers on her desk and said quickly, Leave it. I'll handle it. I nodded without another word. As I walked out into the long hallway, it suddenly felt unfamiliar. Employees who passed by no longer looked at me with disdain. I knew that one phone call had shaken something fundamental, but this was far from over. Late that afternoon, an email arrived in my inbox. The sender was the chairman of the board. The subject line was a single sentence. Be in the main conference room tomorrow at 9 a.m. I stared at the screen for a long time. This was no longer about signing a document or a daughter-in-law being bullied. This was the moment everyone had to sit at the same table. That evening, dinner at home was silent. Mark looked at me several times, as if wanting to ask something, but he never did. Before going to bed, I sent a single text to the chairman's number. Tomorrow could get very complicated. The reply came back instantly. I know. I put my phone down and closed my eyes. I knew tomorrow's meeting would decide who was being forced out of the game. 9 to Ben. The lights in the main conference room on the top floor had been on for some time. The long table was polished, the leather chairs perfectly arranged. The projector was on, but the screen was a blank, expectant blue. The tension was so thick you could feel it, despite the cool air. One by one, they filed in, the CFO, the head of the legal department, a few major shareholders, and finally, Victoria. She entered with her usual composed demeanor, her suit impeccable, but a closer look revealed her steps were slightly hesitant, her eyes lacking their usual confidence. I sat at the far end of the table, silent, looking at no one. At precisely 9 a.m., the door opened. A man in his late 50s walked in. He was tall, his hair graying at the temples, his expression cool and serious. The entire room stood up. The chairman of the board. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, just gave a slight nod and took his seat at the head of the table. Let's begin. 2 simple words, but they made the air in the room freeze. The CFO stood up and started the presentation. Numbers filled the screen, the familiar contracts, the inflated expenses highlighted in red. I glanced at Victoria. Her hands were flat on the table, her fingers clenched. These contracts, the chairman spoke, were approved based on a proposal from the COO's office. His eyes moved to Victoria. Explain. She stood, her voice steady but strained. These were necessary expenditures for expanding our partner network. Necessary, the chairman repeated. Or made to look necessary. The room was utterly silent. The head of legal spoke up. We've discovered that some signatures are not original, and certain line items show irregular cost inflation. All eyes turned to Victoria. She swallowed. It's possible there was a procedural error from a lower-level department. Which department? The chairman asked directly. She hesitated. I knew she didn't dare say my name. If she did, all eyes would turn to me, and I would no longer be silent. Miss Harrison. The chairman's voice cut through the silence. He was talking to me. I stood up. You were assigned to process this file. That's correct. Did you sign off on it? No, I did not. A few whispers broke out. The chairman looked at me. Why not? I took a deep breath. Because the data was incorrect, and I will not take responsibility for something I know is wrong. The room went quiet. I took the small USB drive from my purse and placed it on the table. This contains scanned copies of the original file. including all alterations, photocopied signatures, and the email assigning me the task. Victoria shot to her feet. Are you trying to cause chaos? The chairman held up a hand. Sit down. His voice wasn't loud, but it had enough authority to make her stop in her tracks and slowly sink back into her chair. The screen switched to a side-by-side comparison. The original document next to the altered one. The initial figures next to the inflated ones. The whispers in the room grew louder. The head of legal said slowly, "If this evidence is authentic, then this is not an error. It's intentional fraud." I looked directly at Victoria. For the first time, she avoided my gaze. The chairman leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "Do you have anything to add?" Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she managed to say one small sentence. "I was following orders." The room was stunned. "Whose orders?" the chairman asked. She said nothing. The silence was long, heavy, and damning. The chairman stood. "This meeting is adjourned. The executive team will remain. Everyone else, you're dismissed." People rose, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. As I walked out of the room, I knew the cards were on the table. All that was left was to see who would be swept away. And I understood. This was only the beginning. The great doors of the conference room closed. The hallway outside was eerily quiet. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Only a few of us remained. The chairman, Victoria, the CFO, the head of legal, and me. The chairman stood at the head of the table, his hands resting on its polished surface. "Now," he said slowly, "we're going to be direct." No one spoke. "These documents," he continued, "didn't just appear out of nowhere, and they weren't altered by magic." He turned to Victoria. "You proposed this. You managed it. You will explain it." She looked up, trying to maintain her composure. "I was acting in the company's best interest." "Interest?" the chairman repeated. "The company's or someone else's?" She fell silent. The head of legal opened another file. "We've reviewed the approval history. Some of these decisions were rushed through, bypassing standard control checks." Victoria shot a look at the chairman. "Are you accusing me of violating protocol?" Legal replied coolly, "We're stating that the protocol was bent." That was the final blow. For the first time, Victoria had lost control. The chairman looked at me. "And you? Why didn't you sign?" I answered clearly. "Because if I had, I would be the scapegoat, and I will not take the fall for a crime I didn't commit." He gave a slight nod. "You did the right thing." Those 5 words, spoken so quietly, felt like a vindication. Victoria snapped her head toward me. "You think you've won?" I met her gaze without flinching. "I just think I don't deserve to be framed." "Enough." The chairman cut in. He turned back to Victoria. "You have 2 choices. 1, you cooperate with a full internal investigation. 2, you take a leave of absence from your executive duties, effective immediately." She was stunned. "A leave of absence?" "Yes. Effective now." The room was silent. "You can't," she stammered, standing up. "I run this entire division." The chairman's gaze was unwavering. "And that is precisely why we need to stop you." The head of legal placed a document on the table. A formal notice of suspension of duties for the chief operating officer, pending investigation. Victoria stared at the paper. For the first time, I saw her hands tremble. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice dropping. The chairman's reply was cold. "I can, and I am." He signed the document. The scratch of the pen was the only sound in the room. "It's done." There was no going back. But that wasn't the final price. Victoria sank into her chair, her expression no longer angry, but lost. The chairman turned to me. "You will assist the legal department for the time being. No signing, no approvals. Just provide them with information." I nodded. "Yes, sir." As I stood to leave, I heard Victoria's voice behind me, trembling with rage. "You think this is over?" I paused at the door and turned back. "No, I think it's just beginning." The decision to suspend Victoria wasn't announced publicly, at least not yet. But in a corporation where gossip travels faster than an internal memo, no secret lasts long. Overnight, I could feel the change. The next morning, I walked into the office as usual, but the looks I received were different. People didn't avoid me anymore. They stared, openly and with suspicion. As I passed the reception desk, I heard a clear whisper. I heard she went straight to the top. "That woman is playing for keeps." Another voice replied, lower, "But Victoria is out. Maybe she's the one pulling the strings now." I kept walking, head held high. I understood the counterattack had begun. In the administrative department, No one spoke to me. A few colleagues who had previously shown me pity now kept a formal, cautious distance. My work emails started to include strange names in the CC line, a subtle way of letting me know I was being watched. Around noon, I received a text from an unknown number. You should learn your place. Don't think because you have powerful friends you can do whatever you want. I stared at the screen, didn't reply, and didn't delete it. I knew there would be more. That afternoon, as I was taking a file down to legal, I ran into Victoria. It was the first time I'd seen her since the meeting. She was standing in the hallway, no longer in a sharp power suit. Her hair was still up, but a few strands had escaped. Her lipstick was paler, but her eyes were the same sharp, and now filled with a deep-seated resentment. "You're quite something," she said, her voice low. I stopped. "I just did what was right." She gave a bitter laugh. "What was right, or what was convenient?" She took a step closer. "You think you're so clean? You think no one knows who you used to get where you are?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I didn't use anyone to get anywhere. I just refused to bow." Her expression darkened. "You should remember," she said slowly, "in this company, a reputation can be destroyed much faster than a career." She turned and walked away, but I knew it wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. Late that afternoon, I was called down to the lobby. The reason given was that a visitor was waiting for me. The lobby was more crowded than usual. Employees were leaving, guests were waiting, and all the senior security and reception staff were present. I stepped out of the elevator and looked around, seeing no one I knew. Just then, a voice rang out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You finally have the guts to show your face?" I turned. Victoria was standing in the middle of the lobby. All pretense of control was gone. Her eyes burned with a fury that had been suppressed for too long. "You think you can just blow everything up and then hide? You think you're some kind of victim?" Every head in the lobby turned toward us. I could feel a public trap closing around me. Before I could say a word, she took another step forward. And I knew that with one more spark, the slap I had been bracing for would finally come. The lobby was packed. Employees leaving for the day stood in clusters. Visitors waited by the reception desk. Security guards stood near the revolving doors. The receptionists were frozen, their hands resting on their desks, their professional smiles gone. All eyes were on Victoria and me. No one spoke, but everyone knew something was about to happen. She stood less than 3 feet from me. I could smell her familiar perfume, a scent I once associated with power, but now it just felt cloying and oppressive. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Her voice rose, sharp as glass. "Coming into this family, into this company. Who do you think you are to have gotten this far?" Whispers rippled through the crowd. I stood tall, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "I stand on my own 2 feet." The moment the words left my mouth, her face contorted with rage. "Shut up." The scream echoed across the lobby. She raised her hand. It happened so fast, no one could react. Crack. The slap landed hard across my face. The sharp, dry sound exploded in the vast, silent space. I stumbled backward, losing my balance, and fell to the cold marble floor. In that instant, all sound seemed to vanish. No chatter, no footsteps, not even the hum of the air conditioning. Just a dead, suffocating silence. I sat on the floor, one hand braced against the polished granite, feeling the sting radiate from my left cheek down my neck. My ears were ringing, but I could still hear her voice, dripping with contempt. "A piece of trash like you is lucky I gave you a job. Don't think your dirty little tricks can change who you are." No one dared to intervene. The security guards were frozen. The receptionists' faces were pale. A few people covered their mouths in shock. My husband wasn't there. My family wasn't there. In that moment, I was completely alone. 10 seconds of silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I slowly pushed myself up, brushed the dust from my dress, and lifted my head. The lobby was still silent. I looked directly at her, my eyes no longer holding fear or shock, only a chilling coldness. I spoke slowly, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "You just assaulted me in the company lobby, in front of 100 witnesses." She burst out laughing. "So what? What are you going to do about it? Who do you think you are?" The sound of her laughter was jarring, and in that moment, I knew it was time to end this. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. She was still laughing. "Who are you calling now? Your husband? Going to go cry to your mommy?" I didn't answer. I dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. The entire lobby held its breath. The line connected. I heard the familiar deep, male voice. I spoke, my own voice clear and unwavering. I'm in the lobby. I've just been publicly assaulted. The person who did it is the chief operating officer. I paused for a beat, then delivered the final line. Fire her for me. The entire lobby froze. Victoria's laughter died in her throat. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. You, what did you just say? I didn't look at her. I just listened as the voice on the other end went silent for a few seconds, then replied with two short words. 10 minutes. Click. The call ended. Victoria started to laugh again, but this time it was forced, brittle. 10 minutes? Do you think you're in a movie? But I saw it. Her hand was trembling. I stood there, in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by 100 pairs of eyes, and I waited. In my mind, there was only one thought. These 10 minutes would decide who was walking out of this building for good. The minutes ticked by, agonizingly slow. 1 minute, 2, 3. No one left. No one dared to speak. The entire lobby seemed frozen in time. Victoria stood opposite me, her arms crossed, trying to project an aura of calm, but the facade was cracking. Stop putting on a show. Your pathetic phone call won't save you, she spat, her voice a little too high. I didn't reply. I just kept my eyes fixed on the elevator bank at the far end of the lobby. I knew that when he appeared, words would be unnecessary. On the 7th minute, the VIP elevator chimed. It was a soft sound, but in the dead silence, it was as loud as a gunshot. Heads turned. The security guards straightened their posture. The elevator doors slid open. A man in his late 50s stepped out, dressed in a dark suit, his demeanor calm but radiating an authority that made the entire lobby collectively hold its breath. Behind him were two other men, one holding a briefcase, the other in the uniform of corporate security. When Victoria saw them, her face went white. No, she whispered. It can't be. The man needed no introduction. Everyone in the company knew who he was. The chairman of the board. He walked directly to the center of the lobby. He didn't look at Victoria. He didn't look at me. He looked at the crowd. What just happened here? No one dared to answer. The receptionist looked down. The guards stood at attention. I took a step forward. Sir. My voice was steady. I was just publicly slapped. The person responsible was the chief operating officer. The chairman turned to look at Victoria. His expression wasn't angry, just terrifyingly cold. Is this true? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. After a few heavy seconds, she gave a barely perceptible nod. A collective sigh went through the crowd. The man with the briefcase stepped forward and opened it, taking out a single sheet of paper. The chairman took it. He didn't wait to go to an office. He read it right there, in the middle of the lobby. Pursuant to a severe breach of the company's code of conduct, abuse of authority, and assault of an employee, causing irreparable damage to the corporate image. His voice was even, but every word landed like a hammer blow. The duties and access privileges of the Chief Operating Officer, Victoria Harrison, are hereby terminated. Effective immediately. The lobby was in shock. Victoria stumbled back a step. You can't do this to me. It was a family matter. This, the chairman cut her off, is a company matter, and you have crossed a line from which there is no return. Corporate security stepped forward. Ma'am, we'll need you to surrender your ID badge and escort you from the premises. Victoria stood frozen. A few minutes ago, she was the one striking me in front of everyone. Now, she was the one being publicly dismissed. She turned to look at me, her eyes no longer filled with hatred or arrogance, but with sheer, utter disbelief. I looked back, saying nothing. My silence was the most painful response I could give. As Victoria was led away, the lobby erupted in hushed whispers. Everyone understood that the balance of power had just irrevocably shifted. A single slap had cost a career. The chairman turned to me. My office. We have things to discuss. I nodded. As I stepped into the elevator, I took one last look at the lobby, the place where I had fallen, and the place where everything had changed. The elevator doors closed, shutting out the noise. Inside, it was just the chairman and me. He looked straight ahead, his hands in his pockets. You're calmer than I expected, he said, his voice low. I'm used to it, I replied softly. He turned to look at me, his gaze no longer probing, but appraising. Do you know why I called you up? Yes. Though. It's because you weren't afraid. The doors opened on the top floor. We walked into his office, a vast space filled with light, with a panoramic view of the city. He motioned for me to sit. Tell me, he said bluntly. Why did you stand up to her? I took a deep breath. Because if I had stayed silent, I said slowly, I would have been the one to take the fall. And I refused to be blamed for something I didn't do. He nodded. But that alone isn't enough. You knew that going against the COO was a major risk. I looked him in the eye. I did. He leaned back in his chair. 4 years ago. Project X. You were the one who found the anomaly. My heart skipped a beat. Yes. You didn't make a scene back then. You withdrew quietly. I was young, I replied, and I didn't have the leverage. He studied me for a long moment. And now? I nodded. Now I have evidence. And I'm no longer alone. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. You're smart, he said. And you're tough. He slid a thin folder across the desk. This is a temporary directive. You'll continue to work with legal. I'll handle everything else. I stood up and bowed my head. Thank you. As I turned to leave, he added one more thing that made me pause. You don't owe anyone in this company a thing, Sarah. If anything, they owe you. That evening, I returned home late. The house was brightly lit, and the atmosphere was tense. Eleanor was sitting in the living room. Mark was standing by the window, his face strained. The moment I walked in, Eleanor spoke. What happened at the company? Her voice was no. I put my bag down and said calmly, Victoria was terminated. Because of me. What did you do? She demanded. I looked her straight in the eye. Because of her own actions. The room fell silent. Mark turned to face me, his gaze, for once, not avoidant. What did you do, Sarah? I replied softly. I just refused to take the blame for someone else's crime. Eleanor wrung her hands. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? I nodded. I do. And I'd do it again. The air was thick with unspoken words. Finally, Eleanor stood, her voice low. You are not the woman I thought you were. I looked at her and replied slowly. And you are not the mother-in-law I hoped for. That night, I lay in my room, knowing that from the moment of that slap, not only had Victoria's career collapsed, but my place in this family had changed forever. I was no longer the compliant daughter-in-law, no longer the easy scapegoat. I was the woman who had said no and had proven her worth. In the days that followed, the company was a different place. There was no official announcement, but the absence of Victoria Harrison was announcement enough. The power vacuum was real. People who once followed her every command were now cautious. Those who once looked down on me now watched me with a new, wary respect. The whispers followed me. I heard she got the COO fired with one phone call. Don't mess with her. Some looked at me with admiration, some with suspicion, some with fear. I understood that when you break the old order, not everyone is happy. That evening, the family sat together again. My mother-in-law spoke first. Your sister called. I looked up. What did she say? She sighed. She said you've ruined everything. That you intentionally destroyed her career to get ahead. I gave a bitter smile. If I hadn't done anything, I would be the one getting fired today. Mark was silent for a long time. Then he said, his voice hoarse. She was crying. I looked at him, and for the first time, he wasn't caught in the middle. I asked him quietly, who do you believe? The question hung in the air. He looked up at me, his eyes tired but clear. I believe the truth. Eleanor said nothing more. She just looked at me for a long time and said something that surprised me. You chose a difficult path. I nodded. I know. 3 days later, Victoria showed up, not at the company, but at my front door. She looked tired, her eyes red. We need to talk. Her voice was no longer arrogant, but it wasn't gentle either. We sat in the living room. She managed a sad smile. You won. I shook my head. This was never about winning or losing. She clenched her fists. If you hadn't made that phone call, none of this would have happened. I looked her in the eye. If you hadn't slapped me in that lobby, you would still have a way back. She closed her eyes. After a moment, she said, her voice very low. Do you have any idea what you took from me? I answered without hesitation. I only took back what I never deserved to lose. She stood up and looked at me one last time. You won't have an easy time of it. The price for standing tall is very high. I replied slowly. I've already paid it. And it was worth it. She turned and left. The door closed behind her. That night, I sat alone, looking out the window. I felt no joy, no triumph, just a clear, simple finality. I had crossed a point of no return. This family and this company would never see me the same way again. But in exchange, I never had to bow my head to anyone ever again. A week after the chaos in the lobby, an official memo was circulated. It was short, cold, and to the point. Victoria Harrison's employment had been terminated. Her case had been referred to the authorities for further investigation. The company was quiet. Everyone understood that an era had ended. Victoria never came back. One evening, my phone rang. It was her number. I hesitated, then answered. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice hoarse. "Leaving for where?" I asked. "Overseas. Probably not coming back." I said nothing. After a pause, she continued. "You know, I never thought I would lose like this." I replied slowly. "You didn't lose to me. You lost to your own actions." The line was silent for a moment. Then she said something very small. "Take care of yourself. It's not an easy family to be a part of." "I know," I said. The call ended. No tears, no blame. Just two people whose paths had diverged forever. My mother-in-law changed. Not warm, exactly. But the contempt was gone. One morning, she said to me, "You're not the daughter-in-law I expected." I smiled slightly. I didn't want to be. My husband was different, too. He started standing beside me, not with loud words, but with his presence. One night, he took my hand. "I'm sorry," he said, "for leaving you to face it alone." I squeezed his hand. "You're here now. That's enough." A month later, I submitted my resignation. No one pressured me. The chairman looked at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I don't want to spend my life in a place that reminds me of being knocked to the ground." He gave a small, rare smile. "You'll go far, Sarah." I left that company with my head held high, not because I had won, but because I no longer owed anyone an explanation. Looking back now, I no longer feel the pain, only a single, clear truth. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. The person with power is not always right, and silence is not always a virtue. That slap in the lobby took away my naivety, but it gave me the strength to stand tall for the rest of my life. If anyone were to ask me if I regret it, I would say no, because if I had to choose again, I would still stand up. If this story resonated with you, sparking a thought, a feeling of empathy, or perhaps you saw a reflection of yourself in its lines, please subscribe. Let's listen together to more stories of life, gentle, profound, and deeply true. Like this video to support the channel, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and share it if you believe this story could give strength to someone who needs it.